morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are. If it's evening for anybody, I don't know. You're very committed being up at 9 a.m, all you folks over there. So thank you for being here. Welcome to another amazing day of LlewellynCon. I'm Emily Carding. Hello, good morning. This is my most recent book from Llewellyn, Seeking Faery. So I'm weaving some parts of that into my talk for you today, which rather ambitiously is on the truth within folklore and myth, which past me thought was a really good idea, and present me is looking at going, my goodness, this is a huge and enormous area. How will we tackle that? But I can see so many of you saying hello in the chat. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm not going to be able to keep track of that while I'm doing my talk because I need to read that off my screen. But if I do run out of words and have time for questions, I'll have a little look through afterwards. But I appreciate you and thank you so much for being here. And it's nice to see you all chatting away to each other. So feel free, chat amongst yourselves. So I am, obviously I'm a writer, I'm an actor also. I've previously also written Fairycraft for Llewellyn, and also fairly recently a book called So Potent Art, the Magic of Shakespeare. And I'm also known for my tarot decks and things like that. And yes, I'm an actor, and up until yesterday I was playing Cleopatra in Antony and Cleopatra, and we had our post-show party last night, but I assure you it's 3 p.m. where I am, so I've had plenty of chance to recover. So gosh, the truth within the folklore and myths of fairy. Well, what do I mean by truth? There's a subject matter in and of itself, isn't it, really? I'm not really talking about objective truth or historical facts necessarily. When you're dealing with things like this, it's quite difficult to pin down exactly what objective truth is. But and I can't really claim to be a folklorist. Obviously, as somebody who practices and writes in this area, I'm fascinated by the folklore, but I can't reel you off a bunch of facts. So what I'm talking about really is the mystical underlying truths, or what we can read beneath the symbols, the underlying symbolism, or the stories, the myths. What is it that makes a myth a universal truth through story? And what can we really learn from that on a fundamental level? And then folklore, a slightly different basis from myths, the stories that get passed down, or even stories that people tell each other in the pub yesterday, 300 years ago. That's all folklore. But in terms of fairy itself then is also a ridiculously huge subject area and a very large umbrella term. But the land and beings of fairy have long held fascination for us, whether we were first captivated by the old tales or by modern portrayals. In fairy, we see a reflection of truth that calls out to our hearts. This might not be something that we fully understand when we first encounter it, but it sounds a note of recognition in our souls. We may either choose to heed that call or keep it buried and put it down to childish longings. But that spark within, when we listen to it, that calls us towards finding the deeper truths. Now, most of us are raised in a culture that believes that fairy is just the stories, that it's not real, that there's not a truth there, especially as we move into very materialistic times. We have been doing over the last few centuries, probably, certainly over the last century or so. And we're told that our otherworldly cousins and the land that they inhabit is the stuff of pure fantasy. But yet that truth resounds through the ages, and many of us still feel that calling. It will not be denied. But what is it? What is it? What is fairy? As an umbrella term, it covers the land and the beings of a realm which exists alongside our own, hidden from everyday perception, but intrinsically connected. And the beings that we might encounter, which are all encompassed by the label of fairy, are as infinitely variable as life itself, from pixies and will-o'-the-wisps to the tall and noble Sidhe, from ancient gods to wizened gnomes, from tiny points of light to nameless beings as large as a mountain. To complicate matters further, these beings are often of so fluid a nature that our perception of them may be a combination of how they choose to appear and what our own psychological filters allow us to perceive. And those filters are, of course, informed by the stories that we've read, the movies that we've watched, the myths that we know. So a cheeky geese in the background. What a cheeky geese do I have in the background? I have some builders going on. I just popped in to have a sneaky peek in the chat, so don't think I'm going to completely ignore you. The label of fairy is as vast and various as nature itself, and fairy doesn't necessarily, this might sound odd to some of you, but some fairy beings aren't even necessarily that much more connected to nature than we are. Of course, we all are part of the universe, which is nature, but what I'm saying is it's full of contradictions. They're contrary, the whole very nature of them. And the land and beings of fairy are of a nature so in between all that is that they defy definition, despite our best efforts. They're about as easy to pin down as it is to capture liquid light in a glass vessel. But we shall do our best to look at the different categories of beings and so on. But let's look at some of the ways in which we've tried to understand fairy through myths and folklore. We can only really, if we define them, show one facet of something very shifting and multidimensional. But let's take into account these sources then and influences, as well as the very nature of how we perceive truth. That's quite a lot to take in, but if we consider that all matter in the universe is energy, which is vibrating at different frequencies that create the effect or illusion of reality or solidity. When we have an encounter with fairy, we're perceiving a being, well, this is my understanding, that we're perceiving a being that is vibrating on a different frequency from our own, whose form, I believe they do have a physical form. Sometimes people talk a lot about fairy alongside spiritual beings, and that's not exactly untrue either. But does spirit have physical form? Do we really understand any of this, really? But their form is not as fixed as ours, and they may choose to appear to us in a particular way, or we may perceive them. We might just see something that we expect because we're perceiving the energy, not necessarily through our eyes and our rational senses or through our rational brain, but through whatever other senses might be available to us. Quite often I found that we experience fairy on an empathic level through the heart chakra, and then those feelings get interpreted into sensations or feelings or sounds or images, depending on how we, as an individual being, function and understand. All of us going through lives experience the truth of our lives in a very subjective way. That doesn't make any single person's truth and understanding of the world any less valid or more valid than anybody else's. But young children with open perception and no reason to question the nature of what they're perceiving, nor as much knowledge to or experience to inform their senses, may find it easier to encounter fairy beings in a aurora, is that a word? You can tell that's one of those bits I didn't read off my screen. Let's go off on tangents, but they're experiencing it in a very present, immediate way. And then as we go on through life, we acquire more and more preconceptions of things. And there's the background noise of our lives and other people's and various energetic sensations we're picking up from all around us. So actually getting to the heart of the truth of what we may be encountering can be quite difficult. But despite that, cultures all around the world, that there are parallels there in the stories of their encounters and in the tales that they tell and in the myths. Invisible folk who live within the land. The sightings may be rare, but their presence is often felt in the wild places and in our hearts, those wild places where there's less background noise, like these builders, whatever the hell they're doing outside my window. So if you can hear that, I'm sorry. Oh, I know what you can hear. It's the seagulls. It's not geese, it's seagulls. I live by the sea, and I always forget that everybody can hear. When you get used to a sound and you kind of blank it out. It's seagulls, my friends. I'm by the sea in beautiful St. Leonard's-on-Sea near Hastings. A famous battle of 1066 happened not far from here. So by the sea, it's a beautiful day as well. And I'm here talking to you. I hope it's a beautiful day where you are. So over the ages, shifting beliefs mean the form of fairies have maybe changed in the stories. We have this popular modern image of fairies as these little winged beings. That's really quite removed from their origins and their true power, but many people find it a useful gateway. So I'm not going to get down on you if that's your way in. All of these are doorways that can lead down various passages that if we follow the truth of our hearts, we'll find the truth of their natures too. So most of what we currently think of as fairy lore, I'd say it's mostly derived primarily from Irish folklore, but also from Welsh and Scottish and Breton. What we think of now is another umbrella term, and Celtic lands. All of these umbrella terms are a bit problematic, but we don't have time to get into that. It's easy. We know what we mean when we say, I'm presuming we know what we mean when we say the Celtic lands, varied and diverse and unique in their own cultures as they are. And the Irish folklore was primarily an oral tradition. So we have such terms as the little people and the good neighbours. These were not meant to literally describe fairies, but make them less fearful and keep them on side and to not cause their wrath. It was very important to keep in good favour with any local fairy beings. So regular offerings would be made. They would take great care not to build on fairy roads or through the landscapes, and all these landscapes would have their own stories. You can still now read very occasionally in newspapers from Ireland, sometimes Iceland as well, with the Hulderfolk, stories about people who foolishly built their houses over a ferry, or unwittingly moved into a house that was built on a ferry road, and have terrible misfortune happen until they sort it out. And these stories from over the centuries have been passed down. Many of them are recorded by folklorists, such as Lady Gregory, wonderful source, Walter Evans Wentz, books such as Visions and Beliefs in the West of Ireland, the fairy faith in Celtic countries, are very wonderful sources for these original accounts of encounters. If you don't have them, I would seek those out. And the fairy tradition of the West has its roots. I do words for a living. You wouldn't think it, would you? So in the ancient Irish myths of the Tuatha De Danann, the children or the clan of the goddess Danu, and their descendants became known as the Sidhe, the East Sidhe or the Dina Sidhe. But many modern mystics use simply she, spelled Sidhe, but pronounced she. So some of you might know my Tarot of the She, but I've read other publishers, so I'm not going to go on about those. And this was popularized by philosophical mystical poets such as Yeats. And the Book of Invasions tells us they arrived in great ships from mysterious cities, from these 4 mysterious cities bearing mystical objects which resonate with the 4 Grail hallows of Arthurian lore. So from Phalias came the stone of Fal, which would let out a shout when the true king of Ireland set foot upon it. The spear of Llew came from the city of Gorias, and granted powers of invincibility to its bearer. From Phineas came the shining sword of Nuada, which always found its target, and from Murias, the cauldron of the Dagda, which satisfied all who fed from it. These were the pre-Christian gods of Ireland, in the closest sense that they had then. They were radiant beings, preceded by a race of giants known as the Firbolg. In this sense, they're reminiscent. There's real echoes here through many different cultures, because for me, this always reminds me of the way that the Olympian gods replaced the Titans of Greek mythology. The idea that there was this great race of giant beings, and slowly we're all shrinking. I don't know. But many cultures around the world have this theme of this ancient race of giants. And when this race is replaced, they retreat into the earth. Perhaps they're taking on another vibration. Their power becomes part of the inner landscape. So as the Tuatha De Danann retreating from the world of men, they became invisible. So this is as though they shifted to a different frequency of existence, but they're still inhabiting the same space. And as they faded in prominence, they became known as the Sidhe, the same name given to the burial mounds. Some are still known as fairy queens and kings, and as goddesses and gods within what's understood as the modern Celtic pagan pantheon. One of these most prominent is the Morrigan, goddess of warriors and battles. Many people equate her with surviving into Arthurian mythos as Morgan Le Fay. There are some parallels there, but there's debates to be had there too. She challenges heroes. In many modern interpretations of this myth, people think of her as antagonistic. But what we see in these goddess or fairy women who challenge heroes, who set up obstacles, how do they become heroes without challenges? These are initiatory challenges. And in our own lives, when we encounter figures like this, these are the opportunities we have to become the best versions of ourselves. That's not to say that some things won't just plain eat you. You should avoid those. But, I'm not going to say that everything has your best interests at heart by any means. For example, you have spirits such as the Banshee, or the fairy woman, Banshee. People are very afraid of the myth that's built up about this ancestral spirit, essentially, whose eldritch shriek might be heard when a family member is soon to die. This is something attached to certain Irish families, but not necessarily something that's going to bring about the death itself, but something that is going to herald this particular turn of fortune. Of course, there are also the Welsh myths, the Tylwyth Teg, meaning fair family, a race of tall and fair people with a penchant for kidnapping human children, leaving changelings in their place. We have many other cultures around the world. And throughout some of these, you'll see a similar origin myth for the fairies, which I find particularly fascinating. And for me, this takes us right into the heart of my experience with a certain type of being that comes under the umbrella of fairy, or what through many modern mystics call the Sidhe as radiant guardians of the inner landscape. So many cultures have this, through the sort of the Christian lens, have this idea of fairies as being fallen angels that didn't go all the way into hell. They settled in the hollow places of the earth. There's a quote from Evans Wentz, who I told you about earlier, if you were paying attention and not going off and making yourselves coffee to keep yourselves awake at 9 a.m. I don't know, maybe you're morning people. I'm not, but thankfully it's 3:20 in the afternoon here. I should be more awake than I am. But this quote is, "We could cut off half the human race, but would not, for we are expecting salvation." They're powerful. Don't mess with them. Now, on the surface level, you might think, oh, think about fallen angels. Well, if I'm a pagan practitioner, what relevance does this have to me? This is just some, attempt by the Christian monks who are writing all of these things to demonize the old pagan beliefs. But this myth might be found in Muslim doctrine also, and other cultures. So if these same themes are resonating, what truth might be found in there? Now, even if, angels are not a specifically Christian thing, they existed pre-Christianity, and many people, I'm not going to say everyone, we all have our own ways of working, but especially if you're working in ceremonial magic, you'll have encountered angelic beings, you'll have worked with them in Solomonic magic and so on. And if you've even tapped into that energy, it's undeniably real. So let's take that. I can only talk from my own perspective. Let's take that as a given. They're powerful cosmic forces, and they're kind of difficult not to notice if you start to get into that realm of things. So you can see the Judeo-Christian framework as just one layer of this deeper truth. Now, I've always seen, I don't know what you think, but for me, the angels and the Sidhe have a lot in common, apart from the obvious level of having their image quite de-empowered or disempowered, probably a better term, by some certain New Age writers, popular authors would have you believe that fairies and angels are your helpers, who will help you find a parking space or whatever. I mean, good for you if that's the case. I don't find that necessarily to be the case. I'm trying to remain politically neutral here. The Sidhe are also known as the Shining Ones. So as this implies, they have a powerful inner light. Like angels, they often appear, not necessarily always, but they often appear to be tall and beautiful. Like angels, they have the power to assume other forms. Probable that they're supposedly marvelous, aesthetically pleasing shape. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's wheels of eyes and burning fire and all of that. But I'm talking about the conventional way that they're thought of to appear. That's probably not, whatever their true form is, it's probably not it. There are forms that we are presented with to make them more palatable, more to not drive us instantly insane, Cthulhu-esque wise. If we were to perceive I don't think as human beings necessarily, unless you're incredibly advanced, but it's certainly in our corporeal senses, are not kitted out to perceive them in that absolute raw true forms. So we get these forms that we can actually understand, but those forms in themselves repeat through, I'm sorry, I'm being distracted by weird noises outside my window now, but those same forms will be seen by many other people throughout different cultures. So there's obviously some element of truth in the way that energy translates through to our senses there. But other things that they have in common are the septagram, the 7-pointed star. That's associated with both fairies and angels. Red and white roses. There's a polarity in that which represent forces within the Celtic otherworld. You'll see them through some old fairy tales and folklore as well. They also represent Lucifer and Lilith. There's just these resonances there. They're also known for their inhumanly beautiful singing. And something I keep going off on tangents, so I'm probably going to run out of time because but there you are. I found singing is a way of carrying your energy out into the universe and connecting, a wonderful tool to develop. And there are exercises. This is like marketing. Exercises in my book on how to strengthen and use your voice in your magical work. as an offering and just as a way of carrying your will and your energy and your intent out into the world. So there's something about music and the note and the resonance of that. Gosh, the music of the planets and all of that. Regardless of that, getting back to my point, there's a certain aloofness and extraordinary power in both. Both have associations with starlight, love of the stars of the upper world, which may once have been their home. If you take away the cultural specificity of the Christianized version of this, again back to Evans Wentz, there are accounts of people from all over the Celtic landscape who believed that fairies were cast out of heaven when Lucifer and his followers rebelled against God. There's a verse that people would hear them sing. Not of the seed of Adam are we, nor is Abraham our father, but of the seed of the proud angel driven forth from heaven. The story there is that Lucifer, gathering a host of supporters, rebels against God, leaves to establish his own kingdom, and the force of all those angels leaving heaven so abruptly, or through loyalty to Lucifer, heaven begins to empty. In order to prevent heaven completely emptying, God orders the gates to be shut and says, those who are out remain out, those who are in remain in. And those angels who've left heaven but didn't want to join Lucifer are doomed to inhabit the hollow places of the earth until Judgment Day, when they expect salvations, and these angels become the Sidhe. And this has been passed down through many centuries of people telling this story. So we can start to look into that and unpick that ourselves. R.J. Stewart, who I found to be a wonderful teacher of fairy lore, has something to say about this. He says it's a dogmatic rationalization of an ancient creation myth. And he goes on to say that light from the spiritual dimension falls into the body of the planet, and many lesser but powerful spiritual beings fall with the light. Now, this might remind you of other myths, such as the fall of Sophia, and many other wisdom goddesses. This is something that, for me, has led to a profound understanding of the Sidhe, or fairy beings, as being deeply connected to the idea of the world soul. So angels are representatives of cosmic energy that exists within the celestial realm, that radiates towards the earth. It radiates from the cosmos towards the earth. And fairy beings are carriers of cosmic energy within the earth, which radiates outwards back to the cosmos. So it's a cycle of energetic transmission from the universe into our world and back again, which carries the energy of the cosmos, of our souls. So the life-giving, animating force which connects all things. And in this sense, for me, that reveals a very deep truth of fairy beings as being aspects of the anima mundi, or the world soul. And I have a lot more here. I want to, and I have 2 minutes, so I'm going to have a quick look and see if there's any questions. But I just want to mention the Reverend Robert Kirk as a bit of slightly more recent folklore, but he also described, he was taken into Faery, they think. He died on top of a fairy hill. But he was that interesting thing of being a reverend, but also having experiences of fairy, and wrote about them in the Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns and Fairies, I think it is called. And he describes them as being of a middle nature between man and angel, and notes their deep sadness, which he says, some say their continual sadness is because of their pendulous state, as uncertain what at the last revolution will become of them. And I've always felt that. I don't know whether you've felt that. There's something in Tolkien, there's a line in Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, in Fellowship of the Ring, that always stayed with me about the elves. Sam Gamgee, who loves the elves so much, the Hobbit who loves the elves so much, and he says, they were quite different from what I expected. So old and young, and so gay and sad, as it were. in the old sense of gay, but I mean, you know, who knows? Everything's fluid. In every sense, when we look at the cause of this sadness, it's mysterious. It always seems to be tied into this idea of an original home from which they have somehow been separated. And I don't know about you, but I think that any of us who've connected to that realm feel that sense of longing for a home that we might not ever have really known. But it's past, and I'm going to need to stop there, I'm afraid. Feel free to message me. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, I'm all over the place. So if you did have questions that I missed, I hope that I made sense. But if you want to carry on the conversation, drop me a line and I'll do my best to get back to you. I hope you all have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of LlewellynCon. Take care, everybody.